In the 21st century, FAX seems to have become a cliche or a pithy synonym for the outdated, mundane, or even antiquated. However, there was once a time that lasted for over 150 years, when fax machines were the height of technological innovation and communication. To begin our brief history of the fax machine, we must travel back in time, back to 1836. As we discussed a couple of weeks ago, 1836 was a tremendous time for innovation in the field of communication. Near the end of the decade, Samuel Morse and others invented the electrical telegraph. With the telegraph's invention came an unprecedented level of communication. The fax machine built on the telegraph's invention and technology. Although, as impressive as the telegraph was, it wasn't intuitive. You still had to learn that Morse code. And it wasn't really available to the average individual. There weren't telegraphs in homes. You have to pay a service like Western Union to send your message on your behalf. The telegraph was also limited to text-based communication, prohibiting the distribution of photographs. However, less than 10 years after the telegraph was invented, and even before it reached mainstream use, inventor Alexander Bain was on to the next big thing. The concept behind the fax machine was simple. A machine basically took an image, transmitted it over an electrical wire, and another machine reformed the image on the other end. Even that name, fax, derives from its purpose, fax being short for facsimile, in Latin meaning to make similar. Bain's machine employed two identical devices, one receiving and one sending. Each machine had a pendulum that swung across a metal typeface. When the pendulum swung over a raised letter, an electrical circuit was completed and an electrical signal was sent down the line to the receiving end of the machine, where an identical pendulum that was synchronized perfectly reformed the image by swinging over a special paper that changed color when an electrical current was applied. Bain's original machine was patented under this name. Try saying this 10 times fast. Improvements in producing and regulating electric currents and improvements in timepieces and in electric printing and signal telegraphs. It produced crude images and was often plagued with problems. One of the most common problems was synchronizing the two pendulums exactly. Once Alexander Bain's idea had been released to the world, competition took over to improve and market the device. Giovanni Castellini was the first to offer a major improvement to the device, and, incidentally, the first to introduce and create the world's first fax-based system. Castellini's fax machine was similar, but it was simpler. Both ends, receiving and sending, utilized the same rotating drum with this special paper and a special ink that conducted electricity. He called his invention the pantelegraph. And he even, in 1865, built a pantelegraph line between Paris and Lyon, France. The system was primarily used by banks as a way to sign and transmit important documents. The final major version of the fax machine came in 1881, when Sheffield Bidwell used selenium cells to record the image of a document. Due to technical issues, the first real test of the device came in 1904 when Dr. Arthur Korn transmitted an image, a photograph actually, between Berlin and Nuremberg, Germany. This was the first transmission of an image over wire. By 1907, newspapers all over Europe were using the system to transmit images for use in their newspapers. This process actually took about 12 minutes per image, which was blazing fast at the time. Because selenium cells were often difficult to work with, many searched for a solution, and that solution came in the form of photoelectric cells. With my limited knowledge of physics, it's best to summarize photoelectric cells as a method to capture the image for modern copying, faxing, and scanning. So, if you have copied a piece of paper, you have used a photoelectric cell. The system essentially scans the documents in a line. Each line is made up of roughly 1,728 pixels. The photoelectric cell works by determining the differences between light areas, or white, on a piece of paper, and darker areas, or black, the text on that paper. Where it finds that white light space, it records a binary 0. Where it finds that black dark space, it records a binary 1. This reduces the document to a binary representation. Further processing may reduce consecutive zeros and ones into a shorter, simpler binary code. Once the binary was processed, a modem would convert the digital binary to an analog format and send it over electrical, or more recently, telephone lines, where it would be reassembled into binary by another modem, and a resulting fax machine would then basically reverse the process, completing and duplicating the document as directed by the binary digits. Over time, the fax machine began to see a variety of uses. As has already been mentioned, it was primarily used within news. Now, for the first time, American readers could not just hear and read about Europe, but they could see Europe, and vice versa for the Europeans. The world had suddenly become a much, much smaller place. However, as with any technology, others began to see the potential. In World War I, the German military experimented with using faxes to transmit important maps or other military intelligence. Not only could text be transmitted, as in the electrical telegraph with Morse code, but images, pictures, could also be transmitted as well. A hard copy could also be generated from hundreds of miles away. This proved to be an important development for offices around the world, and by the 1970s, the fax machine had begun to explode. In the year 1970, 25,000 fax machines were in use around the world. By 1980, that number had grown to 250,000 machines. But the numbers grew even faster. In 1985, there were 500,000 devices, but by 1990, just 5 years later, there were over 5 million fax machines used worldwide. The office became the home of the fax machine, and with it came an even greater openness on worldwide commerce. For much of the world, English is the dominant language of commerce. However, the telephone proved difficult for many non-native speakers. Many of those non-native speakers found it much easier to write and read English than actually speak it. So the fax machine proved to be the dominant communication system used throughout the world. The fax machine also replaced couriers and message boys. Hard copies on real paper could now be sent from a remote location to a remote location in minutes. As the price of fax machines dropped and features grew, many homes even added fax machines themselves. The world had suddenly shrunk yet again. Unfortunately, however, the fax machine is no longer the dominant method of communication anymore, even among the more outdated offices. So how did this happen? How did a device that was at its peak just over 20 years ago suddenly become obsolete? Well, honestly, the answer is quite simple, but it involves a number of developments. The most important being the rise of personal computing and email. In the 1970s and into the 1980s, as personal computing began to grow into a real industry, personal computing itself was still restricted to more executive uses and even just secretary use. Although seen as powerful machines, computers just weren't staples of the workplace at the time. By the late 1980s, computers began to be seen on almost every desk in America, and by the 1990s, having a computer was a given. Well, since everyone had a computer, why was office communication restricted to that one singular fax machine? Closely tied to the development of personal computing and the rise of the internet was the use of email. While more formal communication was still carried out via the fax machine, quick informal communication could now be more easily conducted from the privacy of one's own desk. On June 15, 1993, Adobe released the Portable Document Format, or the PDF file format. They even announced that it would be free. Suddenly, with the PDF format, formal documents could actually be communicated and transmitted over email much faster. Files could be shared, signed, and sent back completely on the personal computer via email. And once the shift to the internet was complete, in the mid to late 90s, internet faxing grew. However, due to pricing and competition, especially among email and PDFs, it simply could not keep up. Although fax machines still exist to some extent in nearly every office, their use has disappeared from the home and most business uses. The rise of personal computing, the internet, specifically email, and the advent of the PDF format all colluded to finally kill off the fax machine. So as the fax machine disappeared from mainstream use, it became a statement for much of the antiquated workplace, or those individuals or workplaces that didn't seem to want to adopt the newer technologies, even today. Still, despite this entertaining connotation, fax machines remain some of the most influential communication devices ever invented. Fax machines led to more digital versions of file sharing that we use all the time, such as scanning, copying, emails, and PDFs. Fax machines, along with their long and brilliant legacy, are both the 18th major milestone in the history of computing. So, the fax machine. The next time you use the fax machine as a statement for the more mundane and outdated, remember, for much of technology's history, the fax machine has been an advanced innovation. Alright guys, I thank you so much for watching today. If you haven't subscribed, I implore you to subscribe. This is going to be how I grow my channel. So please hit that big red button and the bell icon so that you will never miss a video. If you have subscribed, consider sharing your favorite video from my channel. Maybe it's this one or another one, but please share that on social media. It's that word of mouth that's really going to help my channel grow. And speaking of that social media, please follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm actually active over there daily, so please go and check that out now. If you guys are interested in more on the fax machine, check out the link down below. I wrote a Medium article and I'd invite all of you to read that, so check that out in the description down below. Alright guys, that is it for this week's video. Please remember to tune in next week, Saturday, 9:30 a.m. for another important milestone in the history of the technology we all use every single day. Click over here if you're interested for another video in the history of computing, or click right here for another video from my channel as recommended by me. See you all next week. Bye!